Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host, coming to you from the line for the truck wash at the global corporate headquarters of Prime Inc. in Springfield, Missouri. So, driving a truck gives you a lot of time to think about different things, and I'm going to turn my flashers off in case they're annoying you for just a second. And I keep seeing this thing that really bugs me in the media, and it's no media in particular. It's everywhere you look, and it's this phrase of this global supply chain crisis, or words to that effect. And I want to talk about things generally, but maybe more importantly in the United States. And I was, a lot of things came to mind. Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, and some of the things he used in there, like the power of context, and also black swan events, right? Like events that happen that are unforeseen, unpredictable, and then sometimes they have this outsized impact. So let's forget for a second about there's a shortage of containers, or let's forget for a sec if there is, right? Because containers are used, and then they're they have a service life, and then they're rotated out of service. But I don't think companies that make containers quit making containers. So either we suddenly needed a much higher amount of containers globally, or we just couldn't get containers where they needed to be. Now maybe it's a little bit of both, but I think it's more like the latter. And what has also happened with backups in ports and stuff, it's pretty foreseeable that when you have workers that only work during the day, even though the world is open 24/7, right? It shouldn't be surprising that eventually there's some kind of backup. It's like, I've often told my kids and other people that divergence, even of a tiny degree, will eventually lead to huge separation. And what I mean by that, and I should have had my VAT board out for this, but basically this: if you understand geometry, you know that if there's a Y in the road and it's only 1 degree, right? When it starts out, it's really narrow. Like the diverging roads, let's say, since we're talking, I'm in the trucking industry, the diverging roads barely separate, right, at 1 degree or a half a degree. But take that out like 600 miles, those roads are going to be really far apart. And it's the same thing with this supply chain, right? One little divergence, all of a sudden, over time and with other factors, gets magnified. So that's kind of the premise of what's going on. But coming back to the supply chain in the United States, and I'll talk about the power of context in a second, as Gladwell kind of described it. But I want to take you back to 1986. Now, some of you won't be able to go back there with me because you weren't born yet. And some of you may be too young to remember this. And, somebody mentioned this to me, and I kind of went back and looked at this. So in 1986, just to set the scene, Ronald Reagan was the president. And Reagan had been reelected in 1984 by a phenomenal landslide. In fact, his electoral college victory was, I think it was like 48-2 or 49-2. I think the only state that Walter Mondale won was his home state of Minnesota and maybe like Washington, D.C. So it was a huge landslide for Reagan. And full disclosure, I voted for Reagan in 80 and 84. So anyway, in 86, right, Reagan has a Republican Congress and they decide they're going to tackle tax reform. And, you know, if you know anything about Republican politics over the past 50 years, tax reform has always meant lowering taxes, especially for the well-off. Now, one of the things that happened that impacted me immediately was they did away with the deduction for consumer interest. Now, it may surprise you to learn, if you haven't been around as long as I have, that you used to be able to deduct on your taxes all interest paid. If you paid interest on a gym membership, tax deductible. Credit cards, tax deductible. A boat loan, tax deductible interest. Car loans, tax deductible interest. Everything, all interest was tax deductible that you paid. And of course, mortgage interest was tax deductible, like it still is today. Although I don't know if that's always going to be around, because it's not the case in a lot of developed countries like Canada. So anyway, and by the way, that little twist right there led to a lot of people using mortgage, you know, equity in their homes to finance lifestyle. Like, you want a new Harley? Don't borrow the money from an auto lender or Harley Davidson, because that interest isn't tax deductible. Just stroke a check from your home equity line of credit from your HELOC. But so that's on the consumer side, and that's how it impacted me. I couldn't deduct the interest from credit cards or my car payment or whatever. But the other thing that was in that bill, another thing that was in that bill, is the federal government started taxing inventory. And what that did to companies all over the United States was they immediately said, we got to reduce inventory. And what that created was, it created a number of things, but it really created the just-in-time supply chain. And back when the pandemic first started, you know, people were talking about, oh, there's a shortage of toilet paper. There's a shortage of... I'm like, no, there's not. I could tell you places where I knew for a fact there were like billions of pounds of toilet paper. Why? Because I was hauling paper products at the time. I mean, I could go to this place on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and there's like 8 billion trees laying on their sides ready to go into this paper mill. You know, I mean, and there were 20 trucks lined up picking up rolls of paper. And a lot of and I've actually hauled the giant rolls that they use for toilet paper, although I hauled those out of Mississippi. But my point is that there's not a shortage of toilet paper. There is not toilet paper on the shelves of the people that want to buy toilet paper right then, or cleaning products, or you name it, right? But there's not a shortage. It's just how we get products to market. And that goes back to the power of context, right? Gladwell surmises in his book that people are way more sensitive to their environment than we often give them credit for or blame for. I don't know what the right term is. But, you know, little things make a huge difference. And if a global news outlet starts reporting about toilet paper shortages, even if there's not really a shortage, it then prompts people to start hoarding toilet paper. You know, I'm sure there's some grandma on Staten Island who lives alone and who has bowel movements only twice a day, so 14 times a week, and she has like 250 rolls of toilet paper in her house. Why? Because she just doesn't want to run out. And, you know, and I'm not picking on her. She's reacting, right? The power of context. She's reacting to news and concern. And so I think what would be useful is, instead of saying there's this global supply crisis, it would be better if we just acknowledged that we have crises and other things that impact the global supply chain. For example, we have infrastructure shortage and lack of capacity. I was coming past the Colton Union Pacific Railroad yard out in Colton, California, and it just so happened we were getting on it at Cherry Avenue, and I wasn't driving, so I was able to look, just to my right and see the railroad tracks. UP is laying new track on the main line into the yard so they can handle more trains, because the trains that come out of the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach move through the Colton yard a lot of times, or maybe all the time. But anyway, a lot of them move through the yard but don't have to stop. And what I think UP is thinking is that they'll have more through tracks to move more trains quickly, which, by the way, keeps them from having to move so slowly or coming to a stop in areas like where you saw the theft recently. That would cut down, they could pick up more track speed and or not have to stop, because they could push those trains further out towards places that are more secure, like the Colton yard. So that's just one little thing. But like I was saying, a black swan is one little thing. Now this is helping the situation, and we're realizing that there are a lot of things that we don't have that we need to alleviate the crisis. And it's not necessarily more truck drivers. It's part of it might be manufacturing things in this country that we now import, like chips for vehicles. Our heavy truck industry is dependent on the Chinese, which is another way of saying our entire economy is dependent on some 12-year-old girl making a chip in China. And maybe it's not a 12-year-old girl, maybe it's a 14-year-old boy, but you get my point. We need to start, and by the way, I'm not an America firster at all, but I do think there are some things that you cannot, if you want to remain economically powerful, you cannot outsource, literally and figuratively. There are certain things that you cannot allow a hostile power to control. For the Europeans, I think that's natural gas from Russia. For us, maybe it's computer chips from China. I'm recording this video on an iPhone. I bought the iPhone because it was what's available, but I would pay more to buy something of similar quality made in the United States. Just like there are people that need to buy, Class 8 heavy trucks. So let's say that the Class 8 heavy truck costs $160,000 a year ago. Would that person who needs that Class 8 truck pay an additional $10,000 this year if they could get the truck? Well, they probably are, but it's not because the chips are made in the United States that go in that truck, or the components that are made in the United States that go in that truck, that's driving up the price. It's just supply and demand. But would you be willing to pay additional money to ensure that you have all the products you want and need when you want and need them? And I think for most of us the answer is yes, because while I wouldn't necessarily want to pay $10,000 more than I need to for a truck or a car or something, if the lack of that truck is costing me tons of money, and there's a ton of opportunity cost lost, then it would have made sense to pay the 10 grand and just raise prices slightly on all my shippers or all my customers. So anyway, that's just kind of my little rant on the global supply crisis and the power of context. And I think we just need to manage our expectations. but we also need to really enhance our infrastructure and our ability to make stuff on our own shores, so we're not subject to the vagaries of some country that wishes us ill. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon. Man, we are so close to 800 subscribers. I really appreciate everybody. But yeah, we'll be back. I think we're going to do a halftime report for Paul's TNT training. And although he's actually over half now, but I wanted to give everybody an update. So we'll talk in a little bit. Bye.